I've been married to Sarah for 12 years now. We were one of those couples who everyone thought had it all figured out. Sure, we had our ups and downs like everyone else, but nothing ever felt like a real problem, you know? I thought we were solid. But lately, I don't know. Things have been off. It started small. She'd get home late from work, then it was, oh, I just had a lot to do, or I had a last-minute meeting. I'd try to talk to her about it, but she'd brush me off. Then came the phone. I don't know why, but she started keeping it close all the time. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, never leave it on the kitchen counter when she was making dinner like she used to. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, maybe she was just being protective of her phone, right? Privacy and all that. But still, something didn't feel right. I tried to ignore it. People go through phases. Maybe she was just stressed. Hell, I was stressed too, work was crazy, and we had a lot going on. But the little things kept adding up. She'd avoid intimacy, sometimes even snap at me for asking if she was okay. I'm fine, stop asking, she'd say. We used to be close, really close, but that warmth, that connection we had, it started to slip away. The turning point came one night when I asked her about her day. It was a simple question, just a how was work kind of thing, but the way she looked at me, it wasn't the usual answer I'd get. She looked defensive, like she was trying to figure out if I knew something. It was subtle, but it stung. Her tone was sharp when she said, "Work was fine. What do you want me to say?" That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I mean, we've been through tough stuff before, right? So, I figured maybe it's just a rough patch. I told myself, don't be paranoid. You're overthinking things. But that feeling kept gnawing at me. Something was wrong, and I just couldn't figure out what. As the weeks went by, the distance between Sarah and me seemed to grow wider. It was like this invisible wall was slowly being built, and I was on the other side, unable to reach her. At first, I thought maybe I was being overly sensitive, but there were just too many little things piling up. She stopped sharing details about her day, like she used to. I used to know everything, from the funny stuff that happened at work to the small victories and frustrations. But now? She'd just give me a vague, it was fine or busy, nothing special. When we were together, she seemed distracted, almost disengaged. When I tried to touch her, whether it was a quick kiss or even just a hug, she'd pull away a little, or if I initiated sex, she'd always have an excuse. I'm too tired, or I'm just not in the mood tonight. I thought maybe it was just work stress, or maybe she was going through something personal that she didn't want to talk about. I didn't press her too hard at first, because I didn't want to make things worse. But every time she pulled away, it left a pit in my stomach. I was starting to feel like I didn't even know her anymore. It wasn't just the little things, though. One night, we were sitting on the couch, watching TV, and I noticed she was texting non-stop. She was looking down at her phone, and every time I glanced over, she quickly hid the screen. The way she held the phone in her hand, almost like she was trying to protect it from me, it felt off. I tried to bring it up, casually at first. "You texting someone important?" I asked, trying to sound playful. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "What, you think I'm having an affair or something?" Her voice was defensive, her tone laced with irritation. That was new. It felt like she was accusing me of being suspicious, not the other way around. "No, I'm just asking. You've been on your phone a lot tonight," I said, trying to keep it light. She shot me a glare and mumbled something about work again. "I've been talking to clients. That's all." But the tension was there. It lingered in the air, thick and heavy, and I couldn't shake it. Why was she getting so defensive over a simple question? It's funny how you can go from thinking everything's fine to suddenly being filled with doubt. One day, Sarah had a girls' night planned with some friends. She'd been doing this more often lately, going out without me. I didn't mind at first. I mean, everyone needs time with their friends. But it started happening more frequently, and every time she'd go out, she'd be gone later than she said she would be. This time, she left around 7 p.m. She kissed me on the cheek, said she'd be home by midnight. I didn't think much of it, until I checked the time at 1:30 a.m., and she still wasn't home. I figured maybe they were just having a good time, but I couldn't help it. I sent her a quick text. "Everything okay? You're running late." She responded almost immediately, but the message didn't sit right with me. "Yeah, we're just out having fun. I'll be home soon. Don't worry." It wasn't the message that bothered me, It was the tone. It felt like she was rushing me off, like she was annoyed that I even asked. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't heard from her all night. Normally, she'd send a check-in or at least give me a heads up if things were running late. But tonight, nothing. I felt this knot in my stomach that I couldn't shake. At around 2 a.m., I decided to go to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the clock. 2:30. 3:00. Still no sign of Sarah. By 3:30, I was wide awake, my mind racing. I got up and went downstairs, thinking maybe I'd be able to distract myself by watching something, but all I could think about was where she was. Finally, at 4 a.m., I heard the front door open. It creaked, and I immediately tensed up, straining to hear her footsteps. She came in quietly, as if trying not to wake me. But I was already wide awake. I heard her shoes clicking on the floor, then the soft rustle of her coat as she hung it up in the hallway. I sat up in bed, waiting for her to come in. When she finally walked into the room, she was wearing the same thing she left in, but her hair was a little messier, and she smelled different, like a perfume I didn't recognize. It wasn't bad, just unfamiliar. She had this look on her face, like she was caught off guard that I was awake. "Hey, you're still up?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "I was waiting for you," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You're late." "Oh yeah, I guess we just lost track of time. We ended up at a bar after dinner. You know how it is." I nodded, but something about the explanation didn't sit right. Why didn't she call or text? Why the new perfume smell? I didn't say anything else. She slid into bed next to me, and I pretended to fall asleep, but my mind was racing. Every little detail was starting to feel like a red flag. The late nights, the distance, the defensiveness. And now this. I knew something was off. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. I don't know what happened, but after that night, I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. Something wasn't right with Sarah. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think she was cheating on me, but I couldn't shake the growing doubt. It wasn't just the late nights or the weird perfume, it was the fact that she was becoming more and more secretive. And that defensive tone? That was new. I started paying more attention to little things, her phone, especially. It had always been something we didn't really think much about. We were pretty open with each other, shared passwords, all that stuff. But now suddenly, her phone was this thing I couldn't get near. If I asked her a simple question, like "Who was that?" when she'd get a message, she'd snap back with, "It's just work stuff," or "It's none of your business." The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often she'd make excuses to be on her phone. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly hide it or change the screen. It didn't feel like privacy anymore, it felt like she was hiding something. One afternoon, she went out to run some errands, and I was home alone. I'm not proud of it, but I felt this desperate need to know what was going on. I told myself, I won't go too far. I won't actually snoop. I'll just check her texts maybe. I convinced myself that just glancing at a few messages would be harmless. So when Sarah left, I grabbed her phone off the kitchen counter while it was still unlocked. My heart was pounding. I scrolled through the messages quickly, trying not to feel guilty for invading her privacy, but the more I looked, the more I found. The first message that caught my eye wasn't even that bad, just some group text about a work event. But then I found a string of messages that stood out. They were from a guy I didn't recognize, someone named Jake. "Can't wait to see you tonight, winky face," one read. Another one, "I miss you, we'll make up for lost time soon." My stomach dropped. I didn't need to see any more. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew I'd found something. I backed out of the conversation quickly, but the damage was done. I was shaking. The guilt was already eating at me, and the questions came rushing in. Who was Jake? Why was she texting him like that? The tone of the messages, the flirting, it wasn't anything a married woman should be doing. At least not if she was being honest. I couldn't confront her yet. I wasn't ready. I still wanted more proof. So I kept it together, pretending everything was normal when she came home that afternoon. But inside, I felt like I was falling apart. I decided I had to find out more, but I had to be careful. I couldn't let her know I was onto her just yet. So I took the next step. I called a private investigator. I don't know why, but the moment I made that call, I felt like I had crossed a line. It wasn't that I hadn't already crossed plenty of lines. Snooping through her phone was already way beyond where I should have gone, but hiring a private investigator felt different. It felt like I was committing myself to the idea that Sarah was really cheating on me. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face that truth. But there was something about it that felt almost necessary. I couldn't just keep wondering. I couldn't keep lying to myself, pretending everything was fine when I knew deep down it wasn't. I needed answers. I needed to know who Jake was, what was really going on when she'd work late or go out with friends. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to be able to say I wasn't crazy for thinking something was off. I called a private investigator I found online. His name was Matt, and he was a former cop, so he knew what he was doing. The conversation was awkward at first. I'm sure he could tell how nervous I was, but once we started talking about what I suspected, he gave me a rough outline of what he could do. He could follow her, track her phone, check her movements, and even look into her social media if need be. The price wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. I needed this. I told myself I needed this for closure, even though deep down, I knew it was about something else, proof, a smoking gun. And I needed it fast. Matt said he'd need a couple of days to get started. He didn't promise me anything, but he said he'd gather enough intel to give me a clearer picture. After I hung up, I felt a weird mix of relief and dread. I was doing something I never thought I'd do, hiring someone to spy on my wife. It felt dirty, but I couldn't stop myself. For the next few days, I played the waiting game. Sarah went about her usual routine, still cold, still distant, but I started paying closer attention. I watched her movements, her schedule, her little habits. Every time she left the house, I made a mental note of it. I kept myself busy, trying not to think about what was happening behind my back. But of course, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The day Matt called me, I could tell something was off in his voice. "I've got some info for you," he said. My heart skipped a beat. He told me he'd followed Sarah a couple of times. One evening, she went to a bar near our place, and when she came out, a man was with her. Matt didn't know who he was yet, but he'd caught them talking for a while before they left together in the same car. And then there was another time. Sarah had gone to a hotel. She checked in around 9 p.m., and Matt got a picture of her walking into the lobby. He couldn't confirm what happened inside, but he'd seen enough to know it wasn't a business trip. He'd even found a receipt with her name on it. I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. A hotel? A hotel? I thanked Matt and hung up, but the rest of that day was a blur. I kept seeing the image of Sarah walking into that hotel lobby over and over in my mind. My stomach was in knots, but I didn't want to confront her just yet. I wasn't ready to lose my mind and accuse her of something I didn't have absolute proof of. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had enough evidence now to know something was going on, and it wasn't just a rough patch like I tried to tell myself. Now I had to decide, what the hell was I going to do about it? I can't describe the feeling I had when Matt called me with the news. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. The hotel? The man with her? That was real proof, right in front of me. It wasn't just vague suspicions anymore. It was cold, hard evidence that Sarah had been doing something behind my back. Something I didn't know about. Something I couldn't ignore. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, trying to wrap my head around it all. My mind kept racing. A hotel. A man. What the hell is going on? I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts, each one worse than the last. I kept thinking of the moments I'd brushed off as nothing, the late nights, the weird perfume, the defensive tone when I asked simple questions. It all clicked into place now. But as much as the anger and confusion were swallowing me up, there was another feeling, guilt. It hit me harder than I expected. Guilt for not trusting her. Guilt for having to hire a stranger to find out what was really happening. Was this my fault? Did I somehow push her away? I couldn't stop asking myself these questions, but I knew the answer deep down, no. None of this was my fault. I had the proof now, and part of me felt relieved, like I could finally stop torturing myself with doubts. But the other part of me was terrified. What was I supposed to do with this? Do I confront her now, or wait until I have everything? I didn't want to make a scene or accuse her without being sure, but I was already sure. She was cheating on me. It was time to decide what came next. The next few days felt like an eternity. Sarah went on with her routine, still distant, still acting like everything was fine. She didn't seem like she was hiding anything. No guilt in her eyes, no nervous behavior. In fact, she acted more normal than ever, almost too normal. It was like she was wearing a mask. And me? I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of knowing the truth. I kept thinking about that hotel receipt, that man, the way she smiled at her phone like she had a secret. All of it was eating away at me, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything yet. I wasn't ready for the confrontation. I didn't know how I would keep it together when I finally asked her. What if she lied? What if she denied everything, made me out to be the crazy one? What if she turned this around on me somehow? I was driving myself insane with these thoughts. Then, on Friday evening, it happened. Sarah came home late again, just like every other night. But this time, it was different. There was no "I was out with friends" or "work ran late." She walked in, her eyes a little too bright, almost like she was trying too hard to look casual. I had been sitting on the couch, trying to pretend like nothing was wrong. But when she came in, I could feel the tension in the room. She looked at me, gave a quick smile. "Hey, sorry I'm late. Long day at work." "Yeah," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. I tried to keep my cool, but my heart was pounding. "You didn't mention you were working late. I thought you were meeting up with your friend, Karen." "Oh. We decided to grab dinner first, then went to a bar after," she said, avoiding my gaze as she started taking off her jacket. "Sorry, I didn't text you." I didn't say anything for a second. I was still trying to decide if I was going to blow it all up right then or wait until I had a little more ammo. But then it just slipped out. "You know, Sarah, I've been doing a little bit of thinking," I said, my voice tight. I watched her freeze for a second, her hands stilling on her jacket. "And I think we need to talk about Jake." Her face went pale, just for a split second, but I saw it. She quickly recovered, but it was too late. She had been caught off guard. "What about him?" she asked, her voice flat, but I could hear the panic creeping in. "I know about the texts," I said. "And I know about the hotel." She froze. Dead silence. I could see the tension in her shoulders. The room felt suffocating. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For a moment, I thought she might just admit it, that she might finally stop lying. But then she straightened up, her usual defensiveness coming back full force. "That's ridiculous," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "You've been snooping on my phone? What the hell is wrong with you? You're crazy." I felt a rush of anger and hurt. "I wasn't snooping, Sarah. I was looking for answers. And I found them." Her eyes flashed, and she crossed her arms. "I can't believe you'd accuse me of something like this. I'm just trying to live my life, and you're being controlling." It was like she was turning this around on me. Like I was the one in the wrong for knowing the truth. I was furious. I was heartbroken. But most of all, I was tired. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I'm not the crazy one here. You are. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and now you want to turn this into my fault." She looked away, her face softening for just a second, like she was debating whether to come clean or keep up the act. But then she hardened again. "I don't know what you think you know, but you've got it all wrong," she said, turning toward the hallway. "I don't need to explain myself to you." And just like that, she walked away. I stood there, my chest tight with a mix of disbelief and anger. She wasn't even going to own up to it. Not even when I had everything in front of me. It was clear, she wasn't going to make this easy. After that confrontation, the house felt like a war zone. But instead of arguments or shouting, there was just this crushing silence between us. Sarah had shut down completely. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd either brush me off or just give me one-word answers. It was like she was trying to convince both of us that everything was fine, but I could see the cracks. The worst part was the guilt I still felt. I knew she was lying, hell she had to be. But part of me kept wondering if I was just pushing her away, if I'd missed something along the way, or if I was wrong about the whole thing. She made me feel like I was the crazy one, even when I knew what I knew. It was almost like she was gaslighting me, twisting everything around. I didn't know what to do next. Confronting her again felt pointless. She had nothing to admit. Every time I brought up Jake or the hotel or the weirdness around her phone, it was the same thing. Denial, defensiveness, accusations that I didn't trust her. But I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. I had proof now. I wasn't the one with something to hide. I kept thinking about what Matt had told me. The hotel. The guy. What was really happening when I wasn't around? The questions kept swirling, but Sarah didn't seem like she was even trying to make things right. She didn't apologize, didn't explain herself. It was like she was waiting for me to just forget it and let things go back to normal. But normal was gone. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, and the thought of living like this, pretending nothing was wrong, made my skin crawl. So, I decided I had to do something. I wasn't sure what yet. But I couldn't keep waiting for Sarah to come clean when I knew she never would. A week passed, and the silence between Sarah and me became unbearable. She didn't even try to act like things were fine anymore. We barely spoke, except for the occasional pass the salt at dinner or I'll be home late when she went out. Each time she left, I couldn't help but wonder if she was meeting up with Jake. I didn't want to obsess over it, but every little thing she did felt like a reminder that I was living in a lie. Then came the night that broke me. Sarah came home later than usual, no surprise there. I'd already eaten, was watching TV, pretending like I was fine, but inside, I felt like I was losing my mind. She walked in, looking the same as always, but something was off. She looked guilty? I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was in the way she avoided eye contact, how quickly she went to the bathroom to freshen up without saying much. I waited for her to come out, trying to calm my nerves. When she did, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Are you still seeing him?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. My heart was in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, denial, more lies, or maybe just her to finally admit the truth. She froze. Her eyes flickered for a second, then narrowed. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Jake," I said, forcing myself to look at her. "The guy you've been texting. The guy you went to the hotel with." "I know, Sarah. I know everything." Her face went pale. For the first time, I saw something close to real fear in her eyes, and it almost made me feel bad for a second. Almost. You've been spying on me," she said, her voice trembling now. "You've gone through my stuff, looked at my messages?" "Don't even start with that," I said, standing up. "You're the one who's been lying to me. You're the one who's been sneaking around. This isn't about my stuff. It's about you cheating on me." "I'm not cheating on you," she practically screamed. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not cheating. You're just obsessed. You're paranoid." I felt this heat rush through me. She was still lying. She was still trying to turn it all around. "I'm not paranoid, Sarah. I'm not the one hiding things and lying every damn day. You don't get to twist this." "I'm not lying," she shouted, then collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, staring at her, my chest tight, feeling this strange mix of anger and exhaustion. I didn't know what I was expecting, but this wasn't it. I wasn't ready for her to break down like that, even if it was probably just another act. I was done. I couldn't keep doing this, wondering if I was crazy, wondering if she was going to come clean or keep lying. "I don't know what you want from me anymore, Sarah," I said, my voice steady now, but cold. "You've already destroyed this marriage. And I don't know if I can even look at you the same way after everything you've done." She didn't say anything. She just sat there, her face hidden in her hands. I had the proof. I had the investigator's report, the receipts, the texts. And yet, she was still denying it. The weight of it all hit me harder than I thought. I didn't even know what to do next. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk away from it all. But there was this part of me, still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would admit the truth. But after everything, I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd just heard, and about how much it hurt. It wasn't just the lies anymore. It was the fact that she was still trying to cover everything up, like I was the one who had done something wrong. I couldn't stop replaying that moment, her on the couch crying, acting like she was the victim, while I was standing there with proof of her betrayal in my hands. It was almost like she was daring me to believe her. But I couldn't. I wasn't going to keep living in this twisted reality where nothing was ever what it seemed. It was time to make a choice. The next morning, I woke up and went through the motions, made coffee, fed the dog, acted like everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was falling apart. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep sitting around, waiting for her to come clean when I knew she wasn't going to. So I made the call. I called a lawyer. It felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. I wasn't ready to give up on our marriage, but I couldn't keep living in this lie either. I needed someone on my side. Someone who could help me figure out what to do next. By the time Sarah came home that afternoon, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to wait around for her to admit anything. I wasn't going to beg her for the truth. When she walked in, I stood up and looked at her. I didn't even feel angry anymore, just done. I've already called a lawyer, I said, and her face went white. I'm filing for divorce. Her jaw dropped, and she opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. I waited for her to plead with me, to at least show some remorse for what she'd done. But she didn't. She just stood there, frozen, her face blank. And that was when I realized, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I expected her to fight. I expected her to beg, or at least get angry and start accusing me of being the one who didn't try hard enough. But instead, Sarah just stood there in shock, like I had slapped her. There was no tearful apology, no explanation, no attempt to salvage anything. She just blinked a few times, like she couldn't quite process what I had just said. Wait, what? She finally managed to get out, her voice barely above a whisper. You're really serious about this? I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Yeah, I'm serious. I had never seen her look so lost, and in a strange way, it almost made me feel bad. But then I remembered all the times she'd lied to my face, all the times she'd pushed me away, and the fact that I was standing there with all the proof of what she'd done. My stomach churned as I thought about everything. The hotel. The texts. The way she had been pulling away for months. You can't just throw everything away like this, she said, her voice a little stronger now, though still shaky. We've been together for so long, Chris. Yeah, and you've been cheating for most of it, I shot back. My voice was calm, but there was no hiding the hurt. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth, Sarah. But you didn't. So don't act like I'm the one who's breaking us apart. Her face twisted, like she was about to argue, but then she stopped. She looked away for a second, like she was trying to find the right words, but she never did. Instead, she just turned and walked out of the room. I don't know how long I stood there after that, but it felt like hours. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. I had made a decision, one that I knew was right, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. Later that night, Sarah came back into the room, holding her phone. She looked at me for a long time, like she was debating whether to say something. But then she just said, I'll pack my stuff. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I'll go. The word stung, but I didn't react. I just nodded, feeling numb. I wasn't sure if she was trying to guilt-trip me, or if this was just her version of admitting defeat. Either way, I didn't care. The rest of the night passed in a haze. She didn't make any scenes, didn't try to change my mind. She just packed, quietly and methodically, like she had already made peace with what was happening. I don't know how long I sat there after she left, just staring at the space where we used to share everything. Our dinners, our plans, the small talks. Now, it all felt like a lie. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt broken. The days after Sarah left were a blur. It wasn't that I missed her, not really, not after everything. But the house felt so empty without her. It was like the air itself had shifted, the weight of her presence now gone, replaced with silence. I hadn't expected it to hit me so hard. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe even a little freedom, but instead, there was just this hollow feeling. I kept imagining how things might have gone differently if she had just been honest with me from the start. But there was no what if anymore. The damage had been done. I tried to keep myself busy, working long hours, taking on extra shifts just to fill the time and not think about it too much. But every time I came home to an empty house, it was like I was being reminded of the life that was gone. I didn't talk to Sarah much after that night. She texted a couple of times, asking about picking up some of her things, but I never responded. I didn't want to drag things out. There wasn't anything left to say. A few days later, I got a call from the lawyer. He told me Sarah had agreed to everything, no fight, no contest. She just signed the papers and was moving on. He also mentioned that she had apparently started seeing someone else. No surprise there. The second she was out of our home, she was already with someone new. That part didn't hurt as much as I thought it would, though. In a way, it almost felt like closure. Like she'd already checked out of our marriage long before I ever knew what was really going on. I guess I'd been the last to figure it out. I didn't respond to the lawyer's call immediately. Instead, I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, thinking about everything Sarah had put me through. I thought about the lies, the secrets, the fact that she was now with a man she'd been sneaking around with behind my back. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty anymore. She made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I hung up and signed the papers when they came in. No drama. No fighting. Just done. The emptiness didn't go away overnight, but it started to feel like something I could handle. I started cleaning out the house, getting rid of things that reminded me of her. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was just about clearing space for whatever came next. The house felt a little less heavy after that. Still empty, but a little less suffocating. It's strange, but once the divorce was official, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted. I can't say I was happy, not really. There were no big moments of freedom or celebrations. But there was a certain peace. A sense of clarity I hadn't had in a long time. After she left, I found myself going through the motions at first. Working, eating, sleeping, trying to feel like I was getting back to some semblance of normal. But every now and then, something would hit me, a song that reminded me of her, an old photograph that was still hanging on the wall. And for a moment, it would feel like I was back in that foggy space where I was questioning everything, wondering how I had missed all the signs. But then I'd shake it off. I had to. One night, I decided to go out with a couple of old buddies from work, just to get out of the house, break the cycle of loneliness. We ended up at a bar, one of those hole-in-the-wall places where the beers are cheap, and nobody cares about the small talk. I wasn't in the mood for much, but it felt good to not be alone. I didn't talk about Sarah. I didn't want to, and I knew they didn't want to hear it. But it was nice to just have a few laughs, even if I wasn't really into it. That's when I met her. Her name was Laura, and she was sitting at the bar with a group of friends. She wasn't my type at first, way too put together, too polished. But there was something about her that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way she smiled when I caught her eye, or the fact that she didn't look at me like I was some sad, broken guy fresh out of a bad divorce. We ended up talking for a bit. Just small talk at first, about work, about the weather, about stupid things. But it felt good to talk to someone without the weight of the past hanging over me. She didn't know anything about my life, and that was refreshing. We spent a couple of hours chatting, and by the time I was ready to leave, I realized I didn't want the night to end. She'd offered me her number, and I hesitated for a moment. But then I thought, why not? What did I have to lose? I texted her the next day, and we ended up getting coffee. Just a casual thing. No pressure. But as we talked more, I realized something. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious. Not even close. But being around her felt normal. It was the first time in months I hadn't felt like I was carrying a mountain on my shoulders. I spent the next few weeks getting to know her, and I noticed something that I hadn't realized I needed: trust. She didn't ask about my past right away. She didn't pry. It was like she saw me as me, not as the guy who'd just been cheated on. And that felt like a breath of fresh air. Things with Laura didn't move fast, and honestly, I didn't want them to. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but we kept hanging out. Slowly, it started feeling less like I was filling a void and more like I was just living. Maybe I was starting to heal, in my own way. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed out of the picture. After the divorce was finalized, I never heard from her again. Part of me wondered if she was still with Jake, or if they'd already moved on to the next phase of their own messed-up relationship. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I knew it wouldn't be easy to let go of everything I had with Sarah, not the memories, not the years we spent together. But every day, it got a little easier. And I realized something important. I didn't want to be stuck in the past anymore. I didn't want to keep wondering what went wrong, or what I could have done differently. That was Sarah's mess, not mine. The house felt less empty, and not just because I was getting used to the space. It was like I was learning how to fill it with something new, something real. And though I wasn't fully healed, and maybe never would be, I was starting to look forward again. I was starting to believe that there was more to my life than just the wreckage of a marriage that wasn't meant to be. It's funny how healing doesn't happen in one big, dramatic moment. It's not like you wake up one day and realize you're completely fine. It's more like you're slowly piecing yourself back together without even noticing it, like picking up tiny fragments of your old self and learning to move on, one piece at a time. As much as I hated the idea of moving on when Sarah and I first split, the truth was, I needed to. I wasn't just going to keep existing in a fog of hurt and betrayal forever. But that didn't mean it was easy. It wasn't like I suddenly became some perfect put-together guy who had it all figured out. I still had moments when I was blindsided by the weight of the past. A song on the radio, a place we used to visit together, even seeing an old picture of us. It would all come rushing back in waves. But as I spent more time with Laura, something started to shift. I didn't want to rush things with her, didn't want to get caught up in another relationship just for the sake of filling the empty space. I was still figuring out who I was without Sarah. And honestly, that scared me a little. I didn't know what a me without her looked like. But Laura, she was patient. We'd meet up for coffee, go for walks, or just grab dinner at a local dive. It was casual, nothing serious. But there was something comforting in how easy it was. She didn't expect me to be over everything. She didn't push me to talk about my ex. She let me open up at my own pace, which, I'll admit, I appreciated more than I realized. And one evening, after a few months of us hanging out, I found myself at a point where I was actually looking forward to the future, to what could come. I hadn't felt that way in a long time. It was a Friday night when everything finally clicked. We were out at a bar again, sitting at the same spot where I'd first met her. She was laughing at some stupid joke I made, and for the first time, I really let go. It wasn't a huge aha moment or anything. There was no big realization. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long: peace. I was enjoying myself. Not just with Laura, but in my own skin. And that's when I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop dragging around the past. I wasn't fully over Sarah, and maybe I never would be, not the memories, not the time we spent together. But I'd gotten to a point where I was no longer letting her and her betrayal define my every move. I was learning that it was okay to start rebuilding, even if the scars were still there. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. There were still moments when I questioned myself, whether I was really ready to move forward, whether I was making the right decisions, whether Laura was just a rebound or something real. But, at the very least, I wasn't letting those doubts control me anymore. I was learning to trust myself again. Eventually, I told Laura about my past, about Sarah, the affair, the divorce. I was nervous, wondering how she'd react, but it was important to me that I didn't hide any part of who I was. She listened quietly, didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She just took it in, and when I was finished, she simply said, "Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad we're doing this the right way." That felt good. It felt like a turning point, not just in our relationship, but in my own life. I wasn't holding on to my past anymore like a chain around my neck. I wasn't letting the betrayal dictate my every move. I was moving on in my own time, and in my own way. In the weeks that followed, things between Laura and I continued to grow. Not quickly, but steadily. We took it slow, and I was okay with that. We didn't have to rush. We were building something solid, based on trust, respect, and no secrets. Sarah? I heard through mutual friends that she and Jake were still together. They'd moved in together, it seemed. Honestly, I didn't care. What she did with her life was none of my business anymore. The anger had faded, replaced by a sort of detachment. I wasn't bitter anymore, I just didn't want any part of it. It was like the weight of her betrayal had finally evaporated. And in its place, I could finally start focusing on what I wanted. And what I wanted was to move forward. To keep building a life that was mine again. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. In a way, I guess I had Sarah to thank for pushing me to find that strength, though I wouldn't have said that to anyone, not even myself, a few months ago. I was learning to be okay on my own again, and it felt like a victory. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, and I didn't expect it to be. But it was real. It's strange how time works. When you're in the middle of a storm, it feels like it's never going to end. But then one day, you wake up and realize the storm has passed. Not because everything's perfect, but because you've started to find solid ground again. That's where I was. Slowly, but surely, I was starting to rebuild my life. Not just in the sense of getting over the betrayal, but in the sense of finding out who I was without Sarah. Without the shadow of that relationship hanging over me. It wasn't about moving on as much as it was about moving forward, taking the lessons I'd learned, the pain I'd gone through, and channeling it into something new. Something better. Laura and I had been seeing each other for a few months now, and I was beginning to feel like myself again. Not the old version of me, the one that was too willing to turn a blind eye to problems. but a new version. A version of me that was stronger, more self-aware, and cautious. Not in a bad way, but in the sense that I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me again. And that included myself. She was patient with me. Laura wasn't trying to rush things. We went out on dates, but it was always low-key. We'd grab dinner, talk, and just enjoy each other's company without any pressure. And with her, I felt like I didn't have to explain myself. It was refreshing. The relationship wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements, like any two people do. But the difference was that when we did hit a bump, we communicated. We talked. No secrets. No avoiding the hard stuff. And that made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being vulnerable with someone. It was scary, sure. But I could tell that Laura respected me for who I was, scars and all. She wasn't looking for a knight in shining armor. She was looking for someone real. And that felt like a breath of fresh air. Then came the weekend I hadn't seen coming. It was a Saturday, and Laura suggested we take a weekend trip up to the mountains. Just a short getaway, nothing fancy, get away from the city, enjoy some fresh air, and relax. I didn't think much of it, but when we got there, it was like everything clicked into place. We rented a little cabin, tucked away from everything, and spent the next few days hiking, cooking, and just being. There was no pressure to talk about my past, no need to explain myself. It was like we were two people just starting to write our own story. But one night, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the stars, I felt a shift. Laura turned to me and said, "I know this is still new, but I just want you to know that I care about you. A lot. I'm in this, if you are." That moment, those words, hit me harder than I expected. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I could actually open up to someone without fear of judgment or rejection. Without worrying about whether I was being too vulnerable. "I care about you too," I said, and I meant it. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, it felt like it didn't matter. All I knew was that I was with someone who was willing to meet me where I was, someone who was patient, kind, and honest. And that was enough for me. It was a weird kind of peace. Like I was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in a place where I could honestly say that I was moving forward, and that I was ready for whatever came next. The trip ended all too soon, but something had changed. I wasn't clinging to the past anymore. I wasn't dragging around the weight of Sarah's betrayal, or my own insecurities. I was letting myself live again, in a way I hadn't in a long time. After we got back to the city, things settled back into a comfortable routine. We saw each other more regularly, and I started feeling more confident about the direction I was headed. I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I was learning to make peace with it. To accept that I couldn't change what happened with Sarah, but that didn't mean I was doomed to repeat it. One evening, Laura and I were sitting on the couch, watching a movie when she looked over at me and smiled. "So when do you think we should plan our next adventure?" And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I had to think about it. "Soon," I said. "We'll figure it out." The next chapter of my life was still unfolding, but I was okay with not having all the answers. It felt good to know that, for once, I didn't have to do everything on my own. And that maybe this time around, I was building something that could last. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. But it was mine. And that was enough.